Hi everyone, I am Dani, and I'm very excited to be here today to talk to you all about biochar. Just a little bit about my background. I have been working in California agricultural systems for about 15 years now, starting in more of an advocacy role at environmental and agricultural nonprofits and philanthropies. And then I spent a few years actually working in production farming at small organic farms across the state, and now in a scientific role. And here at UC Davis, my research has really focused on biochar at multiple scales, from the sort of nanoscale lab trials all the way up to field projects across California. And I'll share some of that work with you guys today. So normally when I'm giving these talks, I like the audience participation. This is a kind of brave new world here of Zoom. So definitely, as Margaret said, feel free to use the chat. I think Patricia will be monitoring that and speaking up anytime someone has a question, or you can hold your questions till the end or pipe in yourself, whatever makes you guys feel comfortable. So for today, we're going to start with just the very basics of biochar. What is it? What is its history? How is it made? And what can it do for us? And to answer what can it do for us, we're going to review some of the recent research that's come out of the Soil Environmental Chemistry Lab at UC Davis. And that's where I work along with many of my colleagues under the direction of Dr. Sanjay Parikh. So we will research, or we'll review the research we've done on agriculture, agricultural systems and yield and nitrogen use efficiency. We'll talk about biochar's potential to influence soil water dynamics or to help us achieve climate change mitigation goals. And then we'll wrap up by talking about biochar's potential to become emitted as soil dust. So I think a lot of you probably already know what is biochar, but just so we're all on the same page, biochar is the charcoal-like material created from the thermochemical conversion of biomass in an oxygen-limited environment. So it's a very technical definition, really just to describe this charcoal-like material. And when we say biomass, we're talking about the different feedstocks that go into making it. So you can see here on the top that ranges from rice hulls to almond shells to corn husks to forestry thinning operations. And we use all these different feedstocks to create this very low weight and porous charcoal-like material. So biochar has tons of variables. It varies by the feedstock, the production method, the production temperature, but all in all, what you get is a material that has a really reactive surface and a lot of pores, which may help it retain nutrients and retain water in agricultural systems. So one of the reasons that scientists really started studying this was inspired by the soils that are found throughout Brazil and other parts of South America called Terra Preta de Indio, or Amazonian black earth. And what you find there is these really, really rich, dark soils where indigenous people had been adding charcoal to soils for over hundreds of years for agricultural management. And so generally in forest soils, you have these very acidic, very infertile systems that are quite hard to grow crops in. So for example, this is the soil that is directly next to this Terra Preta de Indio that has not had charcoal added to it. And you can see that the biochar system yielded these really beautiful green, tall corn plants, whereas the system without biochar did not. And so people started to pay attention to these soils and think, how can we adapt this for modern cropping systems? So one kind of idealized model for biochar production and use that's specifically relevant to California is perhaps to aid in forestry thinning. So we know that because of the drought and because of the pine beetle, we have a lot of dead forest trees. And so one possible model for biochar production would be to thin the forest trees, transport that wood to a biochar production process facility. In the process of making the biochar, a lot of gaseous volatiles are released, which can then be captured and used as a renewable fuel called syngas. And then the solid that's left over is biochar, which can be added to agricultural soils. And you can make biochar a lot of different ways. So traditionally, they use something called earth mound kilns or pit kilns. And this is where you're actually using the earth to limit the oxygen supply to the burning biomass. There are also large-scale industrial systems which make biochar, and these systems tend to be optimized a little bit more for that syngas production rather than the biochar production. And then there are also portable systems which can actually come out to you on the farm, gather your agricultural waste, whether that be grape pumice or almond shell, and convert it to biochar right then and there, which can be added to your soils. And depending on the production method and the temperature, you have really different outcomes. Like I said, some of the more high temperature industrial systems called gasifiers tend to be optimized more towards syngas production. So you'll have a smaller biochar yield. Whereas slow pyrolysis has a much larger biochar yield, but less of that renewable fuel. And the syngas and biochar products are both really important, especially when you think about climate change mitigation potential, because by generating syngas, we may be displacing the need for energy from the electric utilities grid and reducing our dependence on fossil fuels. Whereas the biochar tends to lock that carbon that would have otherwise decomposed into CO2 from the biomass into a really recalcitrant form, which is stable for a long, long time. Depending on the different production variables, you also get really different biochars themselves. So you can see this picture here, which shows biochars from different feedstocks, from animal manure to forest thinning to agricultural waste products. And you see a whole range of colors and textures. And these also have really different chemical and physical properties as well. So one of the things that people are most interested in is the pH of biochar, which ranges from the slightly acidic all the way to the very, very basic. We also have a range of cation exchange capacity, water holding capacity, and a number of properties based on those production variables. If anyone is specifically interested in the biochar chemical and physical property component to this, I'd encourage you to go to biochar.ucdavis.edu. This is a database run by Dr. Sanjay Parikh, which is continually growing. Right now, there's about 1,150 biochars, and there's a tool there where you can actually select a temperature and a feedstock to get a sense of what biochar parameters may come out of that. So it's a very useful tool for anyone interested in making biochar or choosing a biochar for their own system. So this really gets to the most important piece of what we're probably all here for today. What can biochar actually do? We know what it is now, we know how it's made, but we want to know, why do we care? So we know that biochar can manage agricultural waste, generate renewable energy, and sequester carbon. But a lot of you guys as growers have probably seen biochar producers at EcoFarm or California Small Conference promising dramatic results with biochar. It'll boost your yields, it'll reduce the water needs, it'll reduce fertilizer needs, it'll change the world. And some of these claims may be true. Some of them may require a grain of salt. But because of all of the different potential benefits that biochar can deliver, there's been a lot of investigation into this material. So you can see, as of 2005, there was only one scientific publication mentioning the word biochar. But as of last year, there was over 3,000. So this is a pretty dramatic rise in interest. And when the scientists get interested, entrepreneurial interest tends to follow. In 2009, there was just one US patent application mentioning the word biochar, and as of last year, there was 120. And of course, here in California, trendsetters that we are also very interested in this material. So in 2016, the Governor's Office of Planning and Research created the Biochar Research Advisory Group. And that same year, a trade group called the California Biochar Association forms. Maybe most importantly for this group of growers, last year, the Healthy Soils program actually requested management recommendations from biochar producers and scientists, sort of nodding to the fact that they are becoming interested in this material, perhaps as one of the incentivized practices in the Healthy Soils program. So it's a little too early to say. We actually submitted a recommendation in July of last year, and we'll see where that goes. It's definitely something to look out for. So, okay, with over 3,000 publications per year, you think by now that we could definitively answer the question of what can biochar do for us? But unfortunately, it's not so simple. One researcher in 2016 actually pointed out that the whole body of biochar research may not even be addressing global constraints for sustainable agriculture. And what he found was that of the 800 studies he looked at, less than 1/4 of them were actually conducted in the field. And of that very small portion conducted in the field, most of those field trials were for only 1 year and in very, very small plots. So it's really hard to extrapolate to global agriculture based on these tiny short-term laboratory studies or one-season field trials. Another challenge with biochar research is that there are just so many variables. And I know a lot of you folks know that from compost research, where there's so many variables and so many different outcomes that it's hard to make overarching statements. What one researcher found in 2017 when he reviewed thousands of biochar studies was that overall, biochar tends to increase yields in tropical systems. So those are the systems like the Terra Preta de Indio in the Amazon. Very degraded soils, very old soils, very clay heavy soils. But in temperate systems, there was little to no influence on crop yield. And that's important for us here in California as we are in a temperate climate. So sometimes when you're being promised these dramatic results, it's important to see whether or not they're relevant for where we are growing. Research largely shows very inconsistent results due to different biochar properties, different soil and climate cropping properties, and also based on your intended outcome. Are you interested in biochar for soil remediation? Maybe you have some contaminant issues. Are you interested in it for deficit irrigation systems? There's a lot of variables and a lot of intended outcomes that biochar can be used for. So that's where our research comes in at the Parikh Soil Chemistry Lab. Today, I'm going to kind of quickly go over just a few of the studies that we've done. If people are interested in other aspects of biochar, it's likely we've also investigated those. So feel free to ask about something, even if I haven't covered it today. We will start with some of the field trials that we've done in the Parikh Soil Chemistry Lab. So I will start by showing a study from 2017 led by Dr. Deirdre Griffin, who is now at Washington State University. And in this trial, there were 4 treatments. So we have compost with biochar, mineral fertilizer, and mineral fertilizer plus biochar. So this was a 4-year study. So there was a tomato and corn rotation over 4 years in a YOLO silt loam. And there was a walnut shell biochar produced at 900 degrees Celsius, applied at 10 tons per hectare. So here, this graph, what we have is this first box is year 1, year 2, up here we have year 3 and year 4. And we have yield on the y-axis. The first 2 boxes are the tomato and the second 2 are corn yield because there was that rotation. And on the left of each of these boxes, we have the mineral fertilizer without biochar and then with, the compost, we have the compost without and then with, the mineral fertilizer without and then with biochar. And interestingly, after 4 years of tracking tomato and corn yield, what Deirdre found was that there was no influence in years 1, 3, or 4, but there was a slight increase in year 2 in both the mineral fertilizer and the compost systems. So biochar was able to increase corn yields, whether it be an organic or a conventional fertilizer type. So that was a really interesting result. And when she dug in a little bit deeper to figure out why, she found elevated levels of potassium, calcium, and phosphate in that second year. So what it indicated was that the biochar, while not specifically a fertilizing material, was actually weathering to release some base cations, which increased yield. So again, when we're talking about these dramatic promises that biochar producers or others in the industry may be making, it's important to sort of weigh them in our systems. There was a yield increase, but only in 1 year and only slightly. So a slight yield increase and a temporal one. We also have the field trials that I'm actually leading over the last few years. So in these trials, we conducted a 3-year processing tomato experiment in a Hanford sandy loam and in a YOLO silt loam. So I know you guys are well familiar with probably at least the yellow silt loam. I think most of you are growers in this area, but together these soils represent over 650,000 acres of California soils. So the goal was to choose kind of texturally distinct but agriculturally relevant soils. And we grew tomatoes for 3 years using 7 biochars, applied at 3 different rates with 2 different conventional fertilizer rates. So we used a UAN 32. And that's a lot of variables. It was definitely a lot of samples to take, but the goal was to really narrow in on what are the fertilizer and biochar parameters which may lead to the greatest outcomes. And these trials are still ongoing, so I'm not going to show a lot of the data from it, specifically the data on soil microbial communities or some of the other soil chemistry parameters, but I will show the yield data. So here on the y-axis, we have yield in tons per acre. On the x-axis, we have all of the different biochars. So this pink dot in each square is the control where no biochar was added. And I could continue to point out what each of these things mean, but truly the takeaway message is that in 2 locations in 3 years, there was no impact on yield. And as the person who took all 7,000 of the samples over the 3 years, I can say that at first I was disappointed. Like, that's a lot of work for no result. But no result is an important result, especially if growers are being promised dramatic results. So here we can see there was no negative effect, and that's also important, but there were no yield increases. So there is yet to be seen if there are other benefits in terms of soil water holding capacity and soil health and soil microbial communities. That work is still being done. So this brings me to some of the work we've done on soil water. This is a study led by Dr. Daiwan Wang, and here he chose 2 different biochars at 3 different rates and added them to 2 different soils to investigate whether or not biochar was influencing soil water holding capacity. He took quite a lot of data from these trials. I'm not going to show all of it. A lot of it didn't have any results, as did my field trials. But one really interesting result from these trials was that when he added the biochar at 3 different rates, so the blue is the control, and then the orange and the gray are increased rates. Here on the y-axis, we have plant available water. So that's the water that the plant can feasibly access from the soil through suction. And in the YOLO silt loam, there was no difference. So biochar did not increase plant available water. However, in the fine sandy loam, there was an increase in plant available water with an increase in biochar application rate. And this is really important in a sandy soil. We know that sandy soils tend not to hold water as long. They tend to need greater quantities of irrigation. And so what this study indicates is that maybe biochar can lead to real water holding capacity increases in sandy soils. So here is a study that I conducted last year. You can kind of see this image here. We have water and then these very small soil columns here. And basically the water is fed through the soil columns. And what we're looking at here is not soil water holdings, but soil water conductivity. So how does the water move through the soil and kind of simulating an irrigation event? So here I had 3 different biochars amended to 2 different soils, and I tracked how quickly the water moved through. So on the y-axis, we have hydraulic conductivity that is measured in centimeters per second. Here on the x-axis, I have the control and the 3 different biochars I used. And then the darker bars are a sandier soil, the Hanford sandy loam. The lighter bars are the yellow silt loam. And interestingly, we found a very significant impact of biochar on hydraulic conductivity. So in the sandier soil, the almond shell and the softwood biochars produced at 500 degrees C reduced hydraulic conductivity by about 75%. And again, in a sandy soil, this could be really important. If we're slowing the movement of water through the soil profile and increasing plant available water, perhaps it can lead to an increase in soil water savings and help reduce the need for irrigation. As Californians, we are always looking for those strategies. The same two biochars also reduced hydraulic conductivity in a silt loam, which, depending on your agricultural systems, could be a benefit or it could not be. I know sometimes there's issues with waterlogging soils, especially around the spring when we're trying to get into our fields. So this is a sort of mixed result if you're slowing the movement of water through a soil that already struggles with waterlog. Uh, Interestingly, this biochar here, the almond shell produced at 800 degrees C, increased by 98% the movement of water through that same soil. So this, we're still investigating some of the parameters to figure out why, but we hypothesize that it's because the pores in this biochar are very large and perhaps are better connecting the already native soil pores and kind of helping water move through. So all in all,
Dani, could I ask a question?
yeah, please.
On this trial, what was the content of biochar in this soil? I mean, like how many pounds per acre would it equivalent to?
That's a great question. So this was 2% by weight. And so this is not a field trial. These are these really, really small columns. 2% by weight, I can actually pull up a chart maybe afterwards and tell you what the equivalent in tons per hectare is or pounds per acre. I don't know it offhand though. 2%
That,
by weight is a lot though.
yeah, it would be probably
Yeah,
rather uneconomical.
yes, absolutely.
Okay,
Um,
thank you.
and that is actually, it's a really good point that a lot of the kind of small scale field studies we see tend to use very unrealistic biochar application rates. And so I've used some of the same biochars in the same soils at field scale and lab scale to kind of link results and see what may or may not lead to benefits. So yeah, a lot of interesting results from this study. Overall goes to show that your results are going to really depend on your soil texture and your biochar type.
Hey, Danny, I have a question.
Yeah, please.
On the 800 C, is there a chance that the higher temperature actually made it a bit more hydrophobic? Do you pre-charge or do anything to your biochars before you put them in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in these soil columns, all of the control and the columns with and without biochar were all pre-saturated for 48 hours to avoid that. Um, However, it is highly possible that this is a more hydrophobic char. This char in particular has a lot of really interesting properties. It has a pretty high electrical conductivity, indicating that it's really salty. It has a very high pH, a pH I think of 12, and it has the lowest carbon content of any of the biochars that I tested because I think at that high temperature, a lot of the carbon volatilized into syngas. So yeah, this biochar is definitely much different than the other two. So that is mostly our work on soil water savings and yield. And for the rest of the talk, I'm going to go into just a few of the other interesting applications for biochar that may or may not be relevant to you folks. One of the things we know about the nursery industry is that it has a pretty intense carbon footprint when it comes to its potting media, because peat moss tends to make up a lot of what is in that potting media. And peat moss is mined from peat bogs where these peat soils have really built up over hundreds or thousands of years and are an amazing carbon sink. So when we mine that, we're releasing all of that carbon into the atmosphere, and it's not very easy to replace. So we were looking at whether or not biochar could be used as a replacement for peat moss in potting media. So here on the y-axis, we have the yield of marigold. On the x-axis, we have a sort of increasing rate of biochar replacement. So this plot here is 0% biochar all the way up to 70% biochar. And really interestingly, what we found is that there was no effect of yield by entirely replacing peat moss. So this could be pretty significant for the nursery industry if we can stop mining peat moss and instead use what's effectively a waste product. It could really improve the carbon footprint of that industry. And also interestingly, what we found is not only was there no impact on yield, there was actually an increase in plant quality. So this greenness or chlorophyll indicator, as told by the SPAD meter, actually increased with an increased rate of biochar. So that was pretty interesting. So we do have a couple of studies in our lab about biochar and compost. I don't have any of the data to show today, but I know I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about it, with most of you folks being organic growers. So when we talk about biochar in the composting process, there's really two benefits that people are interested in. The first is whether or not biochar can increase or decrease greenhouse gas emissions from the composting process. And there's actually a lot of literature to show that biochar greatly improves greenhouse gas release, or greatly decreases greenhouse gas release from the composting process. It decreases nitrous oxide emissions by actually covalently binding to ammonium and preventing its gaseous release. It can reduce methane emissions by altering soil microbial communities. And then once that biochar or that compost is created and put into the soil, it can reduce nitrate leaching from the soil. So there's a lot of potential climate benefits by adding biochar to compost. The other benefit that people are really interested in is whether or not it can lead to improved yields. There are some studies that show that it can. Mostly what I've seen out there shows that there is no difference from compost alone. So again, it's one of these sort of complicated results because there's not any negative impact, and that's a positive. There may be a positive yield impact, unlikely in most systems, but there are these climate change mitigation benefits. So that's definitely something to consider, especially in California with policies like SB and AB 32, which are sort of these climate change mitigation targets that we have, which downstream impact growers through different legislation about controlling nitrogen and greenhouse gas emissions. So biochar and climate change is sort of where we will wrap up some of our studies. I just wanted to point out this IPCC report, that's the International Panel on Climate Change report that came out in 2018. You may remember it because it caused quite a number of headlines, as it indicated that we are much farther away from our climate change mitigation targets as a society than we had hoped. But interestingly, in this study, they model all of these different climate change mitigation strategies that can be used in working and agricultural lands, or natural and agricultural lands. So forests, wetlands, ag lands. And what they found was that biochar has a greater greenhouse gas reduction potential than grazing, conservation agriculture, or wetland restoration. And so I want to point out that they are not actually modeling the secondary climate benefits of biochar use. They're not modeling things like decreased greenhouse gas emissions or increased soil organic matter production. They're strictly modeling if all of the agricultural waste products were converted into biochar and that carbon was converted into a stable form, what it could do for us. So there are maybe benefits not even modeled here in this study. There is a lot of literature concerning life cycle assessments on biochar. These are models which tend to include all of the inputs and outputs of a system to really get at where are the hot spots along a product's entire life cycle. And a lot of LCAs find something similar, which is that biochar could do a lot to help us meet climate change mitigation goals. However, a number of these LCAs do point out that there are potential pollution or contamination issues from biochar that need to be addressed before we can recommend it be applied widespread in working lands. So we know that agricultural dust is already a known contributor to PM10. PM10 is particulate matter less than 10 micrometers. That's the sort of inhalable fraction of dust, which can lead to pulmonary or chronic pulmonary and cardiac issues. So, and respiratory issues. So if we're adding biochar to our soils, it's very possible that that biochar itself can become part of that inhalable fraction. Some of the same properties that make biochar great for water retention or nutrient retention also make it susceptible to atmospheric release, either during tillage or during wind. So one of my colleagues actually dug into this, Dr. Oliver Lee, and he built a tillage simulator and added soils with and without biochar to measure PM10 concentrations. And what he found, sort of some good news, is that of the 4 biochars he tested, 3 of them did not increase soil dust emissions, which is 75% not bad. However, one of the biochars he tested, the walnut shell at 900 degrees C, significantly increased soil dust emissions from a sandy loam. And when he measured the chemical constituents of that PM10, what he found was that there wasn't just more dust and biochar in that dust. So yes, he captured the dust. Yes, there was biochar in that dust, but actually the biochar itself was inducing the soil to release at a greater rate. So with biochar in the soil, you had more dust in general, just from the soil. Then he wanted to know, is there something we should be worried about in that biochar beyond just the particulate matter? And so using a bioassay called Calyx, which measures endocrine disruption activity, he tested all of the different biochars. And again, 75%, 3 of the biochars tested showed no increase in endocrine disruption activity compared to the soil alone. However, that same biochar showed a very, very significant increase in the potential for there to be dioxins and PAHs. So we definitely want to think about some of these things before adding biochar to our soils. Will they increase soil dust emissions, and will there be additional contaminants in that dust because of it? Luckily, there is a lot of strategies that we can undertake to prevent this. So you can see here on the left, this is a biochar being added at 40% moisture, and there's almost no dust visible here. Over on the right, this is a biochar being added at 0% moisture, and you can imagine what that's like for any workers out there that day. There's a lot of dust in the air. So some common sense suggestions can be employed. Don't apply biochar on windy days, don't apply dry biochar. There may be a role in subsurface banding the biochar, so really applying it in concentrated bands right along the rooting zone as opposed to a broadcasting technique. And most importantly, do not apply mystery biochar. If there's a guy in a truck telling you to buy this biochar and add it to your soils, you may want to think twice before doing that. Definitely you want to know, what was your biochar made from? Was it almond shell, or was it construction and demolition materials? We never want to make biochar out of chemically treated woods. There's a lot of concern around where your biochar comes from and has it been tested for contaminants. The good news is that the CDFA is increasingly regulating this, and biochar companies are increasingly paying attention to this. So you can get a lot of really high quality stuff, but you just want to know where it came from first. And of course, do not forget your PPE. So here on the left, we have someone fully suited up in a Tyvek suit and a respirator. He's got gloves, he's got eye protection. And on the right, we have me from 5 years ago, before I knew about all of this. And my face is covered in biochar, as are all my clothes. So I've definitely changed outfit strategies since learning all that I know now. So to wrap up, biochar is not a one-size-fits-all solution. There are a lot of variables. I think I've said that multiple times throughout, but just to say it again, your soil type, your climate, your cropping system, they're all going to lead to different outcomes for your biochar. And of course, your biochar type, the production parameters, the chemical and physical parameters, and the application rates. Especially for us here in California, we may not be experiencing some of those yield benefits that are promised, but there may be real benefits elsewhere, things like carbon storage, soil health, soil water retention. Before biochar is added to working lands, we should always take precaution to ensure safety for our workers, for ourselves, and for our farming communities. And before you apply biochar, you really want to think about what specific outcomes you're looking for. Again, is it remediation? Is it soil water holding capacity? Is it yield improvement? And if so, once you've picked what your intended outcome is, to start to think about what biochar you want to use and whether or not it can help you achieve your goals. With that, I want to thank all of my collaborators. Dr. Sanjay Parikh is here highlighted in yellow. He has been at the helm of all of this research, a number of other collaborators. My research specifically is funded by the CDFA Fertilizer Research and Education Program and the Almond Board of California. So thanks to all of them, and thanks to all of you for listening.